Hi everyone, this is Charlotte from the Bursary Foundation. Today's lesson we're going to be having a look at translating shapes for one of our maths topics. So let's get started with that. Just to revisit what we talked about in class, when we talk about translations in maths, what we mean by that is that you move a shape without rotating it or reflecting it or changing its size in any way. So it will look exactly the same as it did before. It's just going to be in a new position, usually along the grid that you'd be asked to translate it along. So there's two ways you might be asked to move your shape. It could be to do with being given directions, so up or down or east and west, or you might be asked to move it along coordinates, so positive or negative on the x and y axis. So we'll have a little look about what that would look like if we were to do it with a few example questions. I'll put a nice blue pen on for us here. So question A tells us to translate this triangle 2 squares down and 5 squares right. So what I'm going to do in order to make sure I'm doing this correctly is start with one of my points. I'll choose this one here. And very carefully just count in the directions we're asked to look at. So I'm going 2 squares down, so I'd start at this coordinate in the corner here and go down 1, 2, and I'd put a dot here so I remember where I'm going. And then I've got 5 squares to the right, so I'm going to count right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to put my x here so I know which coordinate I'm on. I'm then going to do the exact same thing with the next dot. So I'm going to choose this one at point 0, 3 on my grid. So again, I'm moving it 2 squares down, 1, 2, and 5 squares to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to put my x here. Now, obviously, if you're doing this in the real world, you're going to use a ruler for this next bit. I'm on the computer, so I can't do that. So I'm going to draw the straightest line I can between these two dots here. I can also check that I've done this correctly because I can see that there are 2 coordinates or 2 corners on the square between my corners on this triangle. And I've got 2 points exactly the same down here. Now I'm going to look at my third and final coordinate point and do, once again, exactly the same thing. So I'm moving 2 squares down and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares across. I'm drawing this one. And again, I can check I've done this right because I can see my dot on the original triangle is in the middle of the line from before and 3 squares up. And here I've got 1, 2, 3 squares, and it's in the middle here. So I'm going to draw my lines again as neatly as I can. So we're then asked to label this with the letter A. So I'm going to pop an A on here like this, and we can go on to question B. So we're now starting off with triangle A for this next part, and I'm being asked to translate it -2 units on the x-axis and +1 unit on the y-axis. Now, if I've got -2 units, that means that I'm subtracting. So instead of adding, so the numbers get bigger along my x-axis at the bottom here, I'm going to subtract so that they get smaller. I'm going to change my pen colour so you can see a bit more clearly what I'm doing. So I've been told I've got to do -2 on the x-axis, so I'm going to start with this point here from triangle A and take off 2 points to get me to here. And then I'm told I need to do +1 unit on the y-axis. So again, I know that this is my y-axis here, and I know that the numbers are going to increase if I add, and that the numbers are going to decrease if I subtract. I'm being asked to add 1 unit, so I'm going to increase it by 1 and put my x here. Once again, I'm going to do exactly the same thing with all of my other points. So I'm going 1, 2 negative on the x-axis and +1 on the y-axis, and drawing my line. And using my check from before, is it still 2 squares wide? It is, so I know I've done that correctly. And same thing again for this last point at the top here. I'm going -2 along the x-axis and +1 along the y-axis, putting my point here, and I can see 1, 2, 3 squares up from the middle of the line here, and I'm going to now draw my triangle on like so. And finally, I'm told that I need to label this triangle with the letter B, so I'm going to make sure I do that. Pay attention to little things like being told to label triangles with certain letters or symbols or anything like that, because you want to make sure it's really clear for anyone marking your papers exactly what you've done. So, having had a little bit of a practice at this, let's go on to our first practice question. So, starting from shape A, which they've drawn from us here, circle the translation that has not been completed. So there's 3 instructions for different translations here, having a translation 0 points to the right and 5 down, have a translation 3 squares to the right and 1 unit down, and having a translation that's 3 squares to the right but 4 units down. I'm going to start in order with the first one here, so I'm going to take one of my points. Let's say this one from the top of shape A. So I'm moving 0 left or right, so it's going to stay exactly where it is. And then it moves 5 squares down. So let's count 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Aha. So I can see that these 2 points join up as a result. So double checking that with one of my other points, I'll do this one. Again, 0 squares right, so not moving at all, and 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see that this matches up, so this shape has been correctly translated 0 squares to the right and 5 squares down. What I'd like you to do now is pause this video and have a look at the other 2 translations and see if you can figure out which one has not been completed. Give yourself 1 minute to have a go at doing that. All right, hopefully you have now unpaused the video and had a look. So the correct answer then would be that the shape over here, I'm going to call this shape B, has been translated 3 squares to the right and 1 down. And I can see that by counting from my same point up here, 3 squares to the right and 1 down. So you ought to have circled or selected the translation 3 right and 4 down. Part B to this question asks us to then complete this missing translation, so to draw it onto our grid. So what you can do if you like is have a go at working out what point on the square grid you think that this new translation ought to be at. Again, pause the video, have a go and see where you think it is, and then unpause it when you think you've got the correct answer, and I'll show you where it ought to be. All right, so now you've unpaused the video, let's have a look at this. I know that my point here is going to move 3 squares to the right, so 1, 2, 3, and it's going to move 4 squares down, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my dot or my X ought to go at this point here. You should then be able to do exactly the same thing for all of your other points in the same way. So it will end up looking something like this. Obviously, I've drawn that a little bit wonkily because I don't have the tools to do my straight lines. You in real life would be doing that, but this should be roughly where your shape would end up here using the counting to go through all of your different points. Now we've had a practice, let's have a look at some problem-solving questions that use these skills of translation, as well as a few other skills that we've done for shape and space over this half term. So what I'd like you to do now, please, is pause the video for 1 minute, read through parts A, B, and C, and have a think about what skills you think you need to know and use in order to answer this question. All right, So having read through this myself, I'd be thinking about the rucksack strategy, where we're going through reading, underlining key information for problem solving and looking for important words that help us. So the first thing I can see is that I've got 3 points that have already been plotted for us in my centimetre grid over here. And I can see that in my grid, I've got my x-axis and my y-axis labelled. And I can see that the scale being used for the units is just increasing in 1 every single time. There's then a question A, which is asking me to reflect the pattern. So here's my dashed mirror line here, and I know that when I'm reflecting shapes, I need to reflect them in a way so they are at the exact same distance for all the lines and all the points, or all the coordinates, if we're doing it on a graph, away from this dotted line. So that's useful knowledge that I'll need. Question B asks me to translate shapes. So I know that whatever I do with this shape A, I need to be able to pay attention to where I am moving it and in what direction I'm doing this. C is then asking me to rotate around a particular point on this grid. So I know that if I'm rotating it, the size of the shape isn't going to change, but the position is going to rotate around a circle like it was a clock hand. I'm going to come back to parts B and C in a minute, so let's do A to begin with. So I can see that my first point at coordinate 2, 5 here is already on the mirror line, so I'm just going to put a point there and leave it, because if a point is on a mirror line, I don't need to move it at all. My next point at coordinate 3, 1 is 1 unit to the left of the mirror line, which means that if I'm reflecting it, I need to move it 1 point right of the mirror line. So I'm going to draw that on there and draw my line as neatly as possible. Finally, my third point is also on the mirror line at coordinate 2, 2. So I'm going to draw this back on like this as neatly as I can. I also know that I've been told to label this shape A, so I'm going to carefully draw that on now so I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, using shape A, I need to complete the translation question for part B. So I can see, underlining my useful information, that I need to move it 5 squares right and 3 squares up. I'm going to use exactly the same strategy that we've used for translating shapes in the previous questions. What I'd like you to have a go at doing now is pausing the video and see if you can work out where the shape would go, and then I'll draw in the answer for you after you've unpaused the video. So let's have a look at this next bit then. I've changed the colour of my pen so it's a bit easier for you to see, and I'll draw on the correct answers. So starting from my top point here, I'm going to move 5 squares to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put my dot here and 3 squares up. 1, 2, 3. And draw my coordinate here. Going from the next square, once again, 5 squares right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 3 squares up. I'm going to draw in my line and double check that I've done that correctly. And I can see that there's 2 squares down and 1 square to the left between the 2 points in the original shape and my line, so I know I've done that correctly. I'll then cut the video so that you can see where all the rest of the points should be drawn. Okay, so we should now end up with our upside down diamond or kite shape that looks like this and have that labelled B just as the question asks us to. So for our final part of this question, we've been asked to rotate this shape around. The point I'm being asked to use for my rotation is the coordinate 6, 5. So I know, going along the corridor and up the stairs, that the 6 is for the x-axis and the 5 is counting upwards to the y-axis here. So I'm rotating around this specific point. This one is a little bit tricky because it's not on the shape itself, so it's something that we're going to have to think carefully about. So if I'm rotating 180 degrees, I know that I'm moving it a bit like a clock hand around, and you can think about it in right angles if that helps you. So this first point here that I'm going to put a blue X on, because it's nice and easy to see, ought to go round so it is now 90 degrees, 80 degrees, so it will end up here. I'm then going to do the exact same thing with my next point. So this one down the bottom here would go 90 degrees to here, and then 180 degrees around like this. So we can see that we're getting a point being created between the two, and they are still one diagonal square away from each other. I'll now do the same thing with my next point, so I can see that ordinarily this would be 2 squares to the right and 1 square up. So I'm going to do 2 squares up and 1 to the left, keeping that rotation going round in the same way. If you need to, you can literally draw on where the lines would be a bit like this. So I'd be doing this, and then I'd go around and do the point in exactly the same way over here. So I've got something now coming across like this. And I can see that that works because the V shape that I created down the bottom here is being created in exactly the same way along this point here. Finally, I'm going to get this point up the top. I can see compared to point 65 that this is 1 square to the right and 1, 2, 3 squares up. So rotating that around, that would go 1 up and 1, 2, 3 to the right. And rotating it around again, it would go 1 to the left and 1, 2, 3 points down. So we would end up with our shape going in this direction here. Now looking at it, I can see that I've got exactly the same kite shape with the exact same dimensions between all of the different points, which means that I must have rotated it correctly, because I know when rotating that the look of the shape doesn't change in any way. I'm now going to do my final instruction and label this shape C. So we have now completed a problem-solving question using the skills that we'd utilise for reflection, for translation, and for rotation. I hope that that's been useful to all of you and that you've been able to complete this successfully. If you have any questions, please comment down below or let us know in the classroom. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye!